very much, Mark. I genuinely mean it when I say it's both a pleasure and a privilege to be here. At home, I'm outnumbered. I am not computer literate. I'm a real fraud. But my wife, May, is very skilled on the computer, and our daughter, Charles, is also very competent on the computer. But that's only 2 to 1. Here I'm something like 50 or 60 to 1. But I hope to hold my end up. And in particular, because I am one of the few people left. Well, I am one of only 2 people left, the cryptographers who actually gave material for analysis to the first computer ever, Colossus, the name you probably know. But we were using that for one stage of the breaking process in February 1944. But a lot happened before then. I was fortunate to study under Professor Willoughby, a fine man, because he'd worked in the First World War in Room 40, which was the very top secret cipher breaking operation in the First World War, breaking the German Navy codes. And he must have recommended me. I had 4 years at Bletchley. I started off with work on a cipher system called double playfair. It was used by the German military police and was an extremely simple operation. In fact, I'd played with it at school with a friend, sending each other messages. And for 6 or 7 months, I worked on that. And then in the middle of 1942, our unit, which was called the testery, after the boss, major tester, was moved lock, stock and barrel from working on that very simple device to working on Tunny. And it was like moving from the late 19th century to the advanced 20th century. The double playfair thing had a sort of touch of the 19th century about it. You could imagine this was the cipher-system that might be used when the British ambassador in Berlin was telling the Foreign Office about the latest thinking of Bismarck. It was that kind of antiquity. So, Tunny, which is the system we then had to work on, was ultra-modern for those days. It had been ordered by Hitler, especially to encipher messages between German Army headquarters in Berlin and the various generals in charge of the huge army groups on the different fronts. In Russia, there were 3 centers. In the West, there were 2 centers. There was another one in Italy, and the first one ever was a link between Berlin and Salonika, which was intended to help Rommel in North Africa. Up to that time, the workhorse of the German army was the Enigma Machine. We could see that. It had 3 wheels, encoding wheels, and it was, if you like, the Model T Ford of the cipher world. The Tunny system, when it came, was much more like an up-to-date Ferrari. The Tunny machine had 12 wheels. The Enigma machine had the 3, and the repeat pattern of Enigma was 26 by 26 by 26. And the mathematicians among you worked that out. It was something like 1,500. The repeat pattern for Tunny, on the other hand, was well over 1 million. Hitler had ordered the system, and from a division of the Siemens Electrical Company called Lorenz, and so it was called the Lorenz 42, S42. It should have been totally unbreakable. Totally unbreakable. It had 3 levels of encipherment. It had 12 wheels. Nobody should have touched it. Luckily, there was a German operator who made 2 colossal errors. He sent a message 4,000 characters long, and the guy at the other end didn't like some of it, so he asked operator 1 to send it again. Operator 1, and I think we ought to put a statue up to him in white. He sent the message again. Mistake 1, he didn't change the setting. So that meant we had 2 messages sent with the same encipherment, what we call a depth. Mistake number 2, he didn't leave it as exactly the same text, which wouldn't have helped us very much. But he was on our side, and he made changes. He abbreviated some words, and so it was on a slide. And this enabled us to break those 2 messages by adding them together. If you add 2 ciphertexts together at that stage, you've got the same as adding 2 clear texts together. And a brilliant professional cryptographer called Colonel Tiltman, worked on this and managed to break the 2 messages. So we knew what the clear text was for 4,000 characters. But he couldn't break the system. Couldn't find out how the system worked. And the job was passed to a 24-year-old graduate called Bill Tutte. Now, nobody's ever heard of Bill Tutte. He broke Tunny. It took him 2.5 months. I don't know whether you could do that. I find it difficult to stick at something longer than 2.5 hours, let alone 2.5 months. But I worked in the same office as Tutte for quite a time, for a number of weeks, and I saw his persistence and patience, and for long periods he would stare into the middle distance and make endless counts. And frankly, I wondered whether this man was earning his corn. But emphatically he was. One commentator this century has said Bill Tutte's achievement was the outstanding mental feat of last century, not of the war, of last century. And when you recollect all the things that have happened last century. This is really some praise, and he deserved it. He deserved it. After the war, General Eisenhower, a generous man, said Bletchley decrypts shorten the war by at least 2 years, 2 to 3 years. And I'm sure that's right, as I'll show later on. Did that make any difference? Well, in the previous 5 years, there had been 10 million deaths each year due to the war. 10 million. So, shortening the war by 2 years at least had that effect, but a lot more. If Hitler had been given another 2 years to play with, he almost made Europe impregnable. An impregnable fortress anyway. Given another 2 years, it would have been immensely difficult to invade Europe. And this was down to build up. We were breaking Enigma, and Enigma was important. But Enigma was used for the smaller units, for submarines individually, for army divisions, air squadrons, and so on. The Tunny was used between the headquarters in Berlin and the top generals in charge of each front. Between people like Keitel in Berlin, who was the head of the German Army, and Jodl is chief of staff, Barlimont, the number 2 chief of staff at that end. And then people like von Rundstedt, who was in charge of the Western Front, von Brochich, also at a different time, von Bikes on the Russian front, Kesselring in Italy. These were the recipients of these messages. Some of them were signed by Hitler himself, and I myself remember deciphering one of these. It caused great excitement in the testery where I worked. But I remember all the generals gave their full titles, Oberbefehlshaber, and I don't know what. Hitler's message was signed simply Adolf. 9 was used as a spacer. Adolf 9, Hitler 9, Führer. That's all. But I bet the people receiving it pricked up their ears. Well, that's the Tunny machine. You can see the 12 wheels. Yes, running across. These would be the motor wheels. These would be the size, and those the car wheels. We'll see those in more detail later, because it's useful to understand how the machine worked. The authorities recognized how important this traffic was, and so in 1942 they set about designing a machine which would speed up one element of the process of breaking time. And the first machine that came on board was called, with very good reason, Heath Robinson Thomas, you remember, was the cartoonist who used to draw crazy machines for tying up your bootlaces or whatever. That came in 1943, mid-43. It began to be available. And because of the importance, a separate department was set up, run by Dr. Max Newman, a mathematician, of course. We were really two tribes. In the testary, we were all linguists. In the numinary, they were all mathematicians. And we were like two Red Indian tribes, living side by side peacefully, trading a bit, getting on all right, but not speaking each other's language. I was totally useless on the numinary side. They were totally useless on our side. There was only one man who bridged the gap, and that was a man called Peter Hilton, who was the only other cryptographer, senior cryptographer alive today. But he lives in America, and he's not too steady on his pins. I'm fairly steady on mine. The Germans found Tunny to be an extremely good system. It was very secure. It was easy to use, a lot easier than Enigma. Enigma, you had to put the text on a tape and then feed it in. In Tunny, you just had a machine and you typed your message straight in. You'd set up the wheels with the wheel patterns for the encipherment of that day, and then you type in and the ciphertext would come out and go over the air. So by certainly early 1943, this was the pattern of use. Very extensive, and so an extremely important cipher system. Breaking this was really like listening in to the generals talking to their boss, or headquarters, about their plans, about their problems, and most of all about their decisions. Like listening in on the telephone. And certainly in the last phase, we were breaking at least 90% of the messages. I have made an exhibit board for Bletchley Park, because there's nothing about the testary, believe it or not. There's plenty about the numinary and the Colossus machine, quite rightly. Nothing about the testary. And on it, I put a picture of Hitler, you know, the sort of thing. He's got a map in front of him and generals around him, and he's pointing things out on the map. And I've put that on our board, and underneath it the caption, "Yes, Hitler, very interesting. We were listening too." The cipher system used a different alphabet. It used what's called the Bulldog alphabet. And this gives some idea. Any given letter was converted into electrical impulses. The letter A had 2 positives and 3 negatives. There were 5 lines of transmission. The letter B had 1 positive, 2 negatives, and 2 positives. The process of encipherment, if that was the clear text, and that was the cipher, you would add that to that, and you get G, because across and across gave a dot and a cross gave a cross, a dot and a dot gave a dot and a cross gave a cross, and that gave you the letter G, and that's what went over here. There were just under 1,000 combinations of those letters, because we had the 26 letters plus 6 other characters. So there were 32 times 31 combinations, which is just under 1,000. I think it's 992, because you're the mathematician. We had to have these instantly at our fingertips. I still have them at our fingertips. If you were to call out 2 letters to me, I would say instantly what they add up to. There's a challenge. And in fact, even today, I find myself deciphering car plate numbers. And I would occasionally nudge my wife and say, look at that lorry over there, got a nearly perfect run. Old habits die hard. This is the process of encipherment on Tunny. There's your clear. First, there was a set of chi wheels which moved along every step. Every character was affected by the chi wheels. Then there was a set of psi wheels which affected each of these lines spasmodically, stutteringly. On some positions it would affect, on others it would leave it to stand still. And this is what made the system so difficult to break. And the wheels that caused that to happen were the 2 motor wheels, the combination of the 2 motor wheels, which said either move on or stay where you are. And this is very difficult to cope with for the cryptographer. There were 3 main phases into which the period between July 1, 42, when we started, and the end of the war broke. The first phase, we broke everything by hand, by brain. There were no machines, no Robinsons, no Colossi. Everything was done. We broke the messages, we worked out the wheel patterns, we worked out the wheel settings, and we had girls in the testery whose job it was to type in on their specially organized machines, Tunny machines, the ciphertext. Having set up the wheel patterns themselves, they were very good. And clear text would come out at the other end. None of them spoke German, but they could see where, if the text was going wrong anywhere. They were intelligent, hard-working. But eventually there were 24 in our department, 8 on each shift, and they did a great job. early days, the Germans very kindly sent out a lot of messages on the same cipher-system, so-called depths. And so we were able to take two cipher streams running that way, add them together, and that made the addition of the two clear texts of the messages. So if you tried roam at different positions against this, most of the time it would give you rubbish. But if you found the right place, you get something like this: E9 spacer GES, which is what very many words in German start with, because GE is often the past participle. Sent, in this case it could be geschickt, sent, or gesandt, sent. So that would look promising. But you then, that was all right, but you then had to get 50 consecutive characters, 50. Sometimes we could get away with 30, but we had to get 50 consecutive characters before we could work out the word patterns. Now that's not so easy. You've got a DE, that could be anything. My wife has kindly given us broken syntax. We took the roam, right, and we can pass on to the next one. And we will say Rome is German for Roman, and a lot of their units were Roman numbers, luckily. So we try Roman 1, Roman 2, or whatever. We try it in letters, and we'd also try it this way. Plus plus means I'm going into punctuation. And you remember quote W is number 2. 8 means I'm coming out of punctuation. And minus the space. And if we do that, then we get geschickt, which means sent. And that's lovely. But you haven't got any tail here to help you carry on. Not the beginning of another word to help. Here you've got the end of a word, and if you've got geschickt there, the most likely word is wurde, was sent. So you try wurde, and then see what that produced. Then we pass on. And so you would proceed in both directions until you got your 50. If you couldn't get your 50, then you'd have to break in somewhere else and start again. At the end of 1943, the Germans tightened up their procedures and there were no more depths. So we couldn't use that system of breaking. But the tester in the numerary worked out a different way, where we only had one message. Now, we didn't have two together. We only had one. What we would do, the numerary was used to take off the effect of the chi wheels, which was a counting process, counting large numbers of cases, in the way that Bill Tutte used right at the beginning to break the system. And that way, you would arrive at, if you found the right place, that's the ciphertext of the one message. That's the text that in English, in German, that you're trying to test. And this is what you get. L, L, K, 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 Y, G, G, X, or G, G. The typical pattern of psi. That stuttering movement. Changes sometimes, staying steady other times. And you would know you'd hit gold dust there. Amazingly, this was more difficult than the depth situation. But amazingly, we managed to break, as I say, 90% of what was sent. How do I know? You must remember, we weren't allowed to write anything down and take it away from Bletchley. I, 2 or 3 weeks before the end of the war, filched a copy of the personnel list in the testery. And it's cropped up in situation after situation. In Jack Copeland's book, it's printed. And if I hadn't taken it, we would never have known who the people were working in the testery. So we weren't encouraged to take things away. I know, though, that we were breaking 90%, because if a day's traffic, the message we used was unbroken, it would be placed on the table, and somebody else in the testery would have a go at it and see if they could break it. Usually it didn't work. There was usually something wrong with the message. One of the impulses was off, or something like that. That pile never grew high. It was always 1 or 2. And this, for me, is one indication. The other indication is, if you did fail to break a day's traffic, this was the cause of some considerable depression, you know, because we were used to success. We were used to breaking everything. So if you failed, it was a bad day. And I cannot simply remember bad days. There must have been 1 or 2, but very few. One of the people working in the testery in the cryptography group was Roy Jenkins. One of the finest minds I've met in my life. A fine cabinet minister and writer and historian. I used to meet with him after the war. And I once asked him, did he know of any other situation like this, the war, where one side had known so completely what the other side were doing and thinking? And he thought for a long while, and he couldn't remember. And if he couldn't, I suspect nobody can. It was a unique situation. I don't think it will ever happen again, because we've learned so much how to break things and how not to make mistakes. Because cryptographers feed on the other guy's mistakes. If they don't make mistakes, you never get any decrypts. There were 3 phases. The first phase, where the testery did everything second phase with the help of Heath Robinson. Not much help, and it wasn't very efficient, it was very slow. We were still breaking most of it by hand. That's Heath Robinson. It had two paper tapes, and every now and then one of them would break and explode and send bits of tape all over the room. And then, with the help of Colossus, which was very much more reliable. And that was from February 44 to the end of the war. In that first phase, the testers are credited with breaking 1.5 million bases of ciphertext. That's a hell of a lot of messages. Colossus came along. It was badly needed. Robinson wasn't working properly. So it was a relief that Colossus came. Run by Wrens, a huge thing called Colossus because it was about 10 foot long, and as you can see, about 6 or 7 foot high. It had about, at first, the first one was 1,600 valves, and the later models had 2,000 valves. Things like that. Ridiculous, isn't it? That's what people said to Tommy Flowers, the man who designed and built the first computer. He said, "You're mad. It'll never work. They're unreliable." And Tommy Flowers had one of the great simple ideas. He said, "Well, I've tried it, leaving it on always, and it's then very reliable." The cryptographers didn't believe it. When he had his machine ready, at the end of 43, three of the cryptographers, the senior men, asked him to do a test on a calculation. He came up with the answer. They said, "Well, that's just a fluke. Do it again." And he did it again and got the same answer. Cryptographers, being a rather stubborn, pig-headed lot, had him do it 5 times. And each time he came up with the answer. At that point they went home. At the end of the war, Bill Tutte, who wrote Tunny, and a colleague went over to Germany and saw a Tunny machine. Bill Tutte saw it for the first time when Turing broke Enigma. He'd seen the machine because the Poles brought a specimen to Paris and he'd been able to see it. Tutte had no idea what it looked like. Anyway, these two were shown how the machine worked by a German operator. They're very proud of this machine. And Bill Tutte and his colleague had to stand there and say, "Oh God, very impressive. Nobody's ever going to break that." I never called him Bill. We never smoked much at all because we were different tribes. We were in the same room, but we might have been on different planets. A nice man, though. It's interesting. If Tunny had not been broken, there wouldn't have been any need for a computer. I don't know what you guys would have been doing today. But it would have come along sooner or later. we had, in our offices, always had an American around by agreement with the British government. And he would watch everything we did and report on to his superiors. And that must have included everything to do with the computer. A lot of people think the Americans invented the computer. I did a small test among 20 or so of my friends and acquaintances. Half of them thought it was an American invention. A quarter of them didn't know, and a quarter of them said it was British. This is a scandal. It's a scandal. Well, this is all very beautiful. You were very clever people at Bletchley, breaking this and breaking that. But did it do anything? Did it have any effect? And this is where the people who've written about Bletchley or produced programs about Bletchley, for me, break down. This is what it was all about. What difference did it make? So I've taken 6 examples. The first had some effect on the Battle of Britain because Turing had broken Air Enigma in 1939, and some messages gave indications of targets and timings, the dates and targets of bomber raids. There was another one early on, and that is information about Rommel and his situation in North Africa, and the supply of ships to North Africa. We were able to bomb these supplies because we knew where they were going and when they were going. So that was one early one. The second, which, if you think about El Alamein, if Rommel had broken through then, that could have been the end of the war for Britain. The second one was equally significant. In 1940-41, we were not breaking naval Enigma. The naval people were much more careful how they used the Enigma machine, and it was much more difficult to break. No mistakes means no decrypts. But eventually Turing found a way through it and broke it. And here we see the next chart. Right? This is a chart I pinched from the war cabinet rooms, and it shows the drop in sinkings after Turing had broken naval Enigma. I met only 2 months ago somebody who really brought this home to me. It's one thing to sit here and say, oh yes, Turing did a great job, he broke naval Enigma. Sandy Stonall was an SAS man returning on a ship in a convoy from America in 40 or 41. And he told me about it. And his face darkened. And he said, the worst days of my life. And he was 90. He said our convoy was 21 ships. They sank 12 of them. And of course they weren't allowed to to stop and pick up survivors. Otherwise they'd have been torpedoed as well. And this was happening all the time. All the time. I do not see how Britain could have survived more than 6 months, 8 months more of that sort of thing. We'd lost all our material in Dunkirk. All our tanks, all our trucks, they all had to be replaced. Most of our food came from abroad. We would have been starved out. We wouldn't be sitting here today. We'd be under some the successors to Goering and Goebbels. This is my conviction, and a lot of people are convinced of the same. Okay. The next one. It's the same story with the third one. Of course, probably never heard of. The Germans, as you know, tried to break the Russian armies as they'd broken the French in 1940. And they tried this at Stalingrad, and they nearly made it. The Russians managed to fight them off. But the Germans made another huge assault at a city called Kursk. They planned it in April 1943. And we were able to tell the Russians, warn them this was going to happen. Tell them the attack was going to be a pincer attack. We even told them the army groups and tank forces, the panzer forces, that were going to be used. We had to disguise it all and pretend that it came from spies and German spies that had been turned and so on. But we told them, and the Russians were able to fight it off. I'm not sure they ever sent us a thank you note. Any more than the French did. In northeast France, the invasion of D-Day, there was one absolutely crucial question. Can you turn to, have you gone northeast? Crucial question. Where were the bulk of German troops? Were they on the Normandy coast, as the generals wanted, or were they around Calais, as Hitler wanted? Hitler had swallowed our story because the British were so creative and inventive in those days. And we'd built lots of things which from the air looked like landing craft, papier-mâché or something. And we'd moored these on the Kent and Essex coasts. Ridiculous. But Hitler swallowed it. He thought the landing was going to be in the Calais region, and he insisted that the bulk of troops be up there. The German generals must have been pretty fed up. They guessed it would be Normandy with its beaches and its open landings. Imagine what would have happened if they had had their way. D-Day would have been a massacre. Luckily, we knew Hitler was the boss and he won out at that time. You see what I mean by saying the work of Bletchley had a massive effect on Britain's fortunes and the Allies' fortunes, and indeed on Europe's fortunes. What people forget is that we liberated Germany as well. And then the final, after D-Day, we got a lot of information through the generals pursuing the German forces back to the frontier. It wasn't always heeded, particularly by Montgomery, who knew better. Now, people like myself, I suppose, did a reasonable job in what we were asked to do. We could have done none of it without three key men. One, you know, probably, many of you, perhaps most of you, Turing, Alan Turing. The second, rather silly photo of Bill Tutte. He looked a lot more impressive than that. One, I think I mentioned it possibly already, but it's worth repeating. One commentator has called Tutte's work on Tunny the outstanding mental achievement of the last century. Well, there he is. The third man is Tommy Flowers. I'm kicking myself because I'm going to ask you how many of you knew who designed and built the first computer ever. That would have been an interesting result. Actually, be honest. Do you mind my asking you to raise an arm if you knew? We've got a few brave souls, well done, but not many. The computer has had more effect than anything else on how we live, how we work, how we play, including our young lady who I'm delighted to see here today. And probably many of us as well. But who has ever heard of Tommy Flowers? I haven't seen. Never mind. They were rewarded. They were rewarded. Turing got a bonus, £200. And after the war, he got an OBE, which many civil servants today, senior civil servants, get for keeping their desks tidy and their noses clean. I don't mean any disrespect to civil servants. Tommy Flowers did better. He got £1,000. Maybe today that would be 60,000. Quite a bit of money. But for doing such an important job and for laying the foundations of the world we have today, worldwide. He got a decoration too. A grateful government gave him unbelievably, an MBE. Now, 6 months or so ago, a dear old lady, and I mean no disrespect to her, was given an MBE for a fish and chip shop for 50 years and serving the community. Our cricketers, when they beat the Australians in Australia, were given an MBE. Not quite on a par with what Tommy Flowers did. In the 18th century, John Churchill was made Duke of Marlborough and given Blenheim Palace. 100 years later, Wellington also deserved well of his country and was given a dukedom and given Apsley House, number 1 Piccadilly. I don't suggest that Tommy Flowers could have been made Duke of Dollis Hill, but they've had plenty of years to do something. And the authorities, and that includes GCHQ, seem to me to have done nothing. The story of Turing broke in 1974 with the book by an RAF man. They've had plenty of time to deal with that. 35 years to do something about Turing. They've got a plaque up on his house where he was born in North London. They've got a street named after him in the outer skirts of Manchester. They've got a bust of him in Bletchley Park in one of the rooms. Nothing in London. And for me, and for many other people, this is the man who saved his country. I think it's a disgrace. However, these two did quite well, relatively speaking. Bill Tutte, who'd opened the door to the computer age and saved millions of lives. I'd like to guess what he got. He got nothing. Absolutely nothing. No wonder he went to Canada and made his living over there, where he became, for his work on mathematical combinations, whatever they are, he was made a fellow of the Canadian Royal Society. Not only that, he was made a fellow of the Royal Society in this country, which is the top accolade in the scientific world. But the government has done nothing about any of these things. I mentioned Roy Jenkins. There are other very distinguished, interesting people. Peter Benenson, you probably don't know his name, but he is the man who founded Amnesty and ran it for a number of years. Peter Hilton, who was a distinguished professor emeritus in one of the top universities in America. Extraordinary bunch of people. I was an ordinary mortal and very honoured to work with such company. And I think we should all be very grateful to them, as indeed I am grateful to you for your interest. Thank you very much indeed.
I was wondering whether your unit was dealing with messages, the interception and decryption of messages from the German Army solely, or did you deal with messages from the SS as well?
No, this is strictly the German Army High Command. The Oberkommando des Heeres and the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht. And there was plenty of that.
Do you know what encryption we were using and how successful the Germans were in deciphering our own encrypted messages?
They had some success, I think, but nowhere near as much as we had. It's an interesting question. I'm not sure it's ever been handled by anybody. So you've got the basis of a thesis there.
Hi. I had a kind of technical question about the keys that the Germans must have been using to be able to read the messages that were being sent. Surely they must have had like a key setting that they were sharing amongst their troops. How was that transferred, and why wasn't anybody able to just get a hold of that as opposed to trying to decipher everything?
Good, very good question. At the beginning, the Germans used to send a preamble to the message with 12 letters. And those 12 letters, the guy, second operator, would look them up and set his machine at those positions. However, after a few weeks of that, they decided that was a bit sloppy. And so they sent out books of what to be used on individual days. And it was those we had to break. Thank you.
Well, there's a lot of decoding, so it's passively listening to the traffic. Was there any injection of any messages into the system to try and confuse the Germans? In other words, giving misinformation. Did that happen? So encrypting
messages? They were so totally convinced that it was all unbreakable. They didn't bother. There was no misinformation that I know of.
Yes, but did we want to give misinformation to them? That's my question. Did we want to give misinformation to them that you used the encrypting tools of Tunny?
I really don't know. I wouldn't put it past us. We did so many. Forgive me going on about this, but the British at that stage were so inventive and so creative. I think we probably still are. Thank you.
Did Churchill know about Pearl Harbor before Roosevelt?
It's just a pity you can't ask Churchill. I've no idea. I'm not sure whether we were as successful on Japanese ciphers as we were on German. The idea of trying to break a Japanese ciphers sends a cold shiver up my spine because it looks like enciphered anyway. But I can say that after he had broken those two messages, John Tiltman was moved on to Japanese ciphers. But what success he had, really, I didn't need to know, so nobody told me. Need to know was the Bletchley motto.
What's your opinion on the story that we knew Coventry was going to be bombed before it happened?
That's a very difficult one, isn't it? What you've got to realise is that we were able to use this Enigma information in so many ways and in effect save so many lives that to throw this away for one particular situation was foolhardy. But I don't envy Churchill having to make that decision. And he had so many to make of. I wouldn't like to be Prime Minister today, let alone then. What a nightmare. Good question again. Most interesting question.
Obviously, your work there was secret. What was your cover story? What you were doing during the day or night when you were actually breaking the codes?
A very amusing question. You have an extraordinary situation with Bletchley. Bletchley was a railway town. I was billeted in one of the small houses. And the general thesis then was that Bletchley Park was used by Littlewoods, football pools. So, although we hadn't created that, that was the cover story that was wished on to us. Funnily enough, nobody asked me, not even my parents asked me what I was doing. They probably felt that I would tell them. And quite honestly, until I knew that Tunny was declassified, I wasn't able to tell my dear wife what I had been working on, what system I'd been working on. She knew I'd been at Bletchley, she knew what Bletchley did, but I couldn't tell her about Tunny until I knew in 2002 that Tunny had been declassified. It was, when you consider there were thousands, tens of thousands of people involved in Bletchley, the secret was kept so well. There was only one man, a Captain Carson, I think was his name, who broke the secrecy. He would walk out with decrypts stuffed down his trouser legs until he was found out, and he would send these to the Russians. Otherwise, it was total.
Okay, I think one more round of applause.